Welcome everyone to this latest video in my Writers in Conversation series. So today I'm joined by Becky Garrison and I'm so excited about this discussion as it's all about creative ways to tell your story. Now, before we introduce ourselves and our books, there is a live Q&A facility for viewers as this is a live stream video. So if you're watching this when it's live on YouTube, then you'll be able to use the live chat option and send in any questions for Becky or myself. And we'll be able to answer your questions too during this discussion. Now, this recording will of course also be available to watch at a later point as it will remain on YouTube. So if you're watching at a later date and also have any questions, just pop them in the video's comments, like leaving a normal comment as you would on any other video, and we should be able to reply to your comment then. So Becky, would you like to go first with the introductions?
Oh, thank you. My name is Becky Garrison. I'm a freelance writer. I began when I sold my first article to the Wittenberg Door in 1994. That's the world's oldest, largest, and only religious satire magazine. They folded in 2006. Around that time, I began to leave institutional Christianity, and I started publishing more secular spirituality and delving into sacred sexuality as well. And since I moved to Portland from New York City and a little bit in Boston, I began to explore also the craft culture of the Pacific Northwest, like cannabis, beer, spirits, cider, and also wine. Forgot about wine. And so that kind of developed my interest in writing my book, Roger Williams' Little Book of Virtues, based on my 11th great grandfather. I cannot believe I forgot the number there. I self-published that book in 2013. There wasn't an interest then in faith and politics books. But then after Trump got reelected, all of a sudden there was this spike in interest in faith and politics books. So I found a publisher and wanted to publish this. And what I'm exploring about this is he is a pioneer of religious liberty. So I was wondering, what can I learn about my ancestors' life and ministry that can help us in the United States with our current socio-political divide that is so girded by this politicized form of faith? And what prompted you to use, your book?
Yeah, so my book is called Captive. Here it is. Oh, where's the camera? There's the camera. Yeah, so it is a poetry collection, and well, it's a memoir in poetry. So it's about the first year when I had brain inflammation. So yeah, I have this autoimmune condition where antibodies attack my brain, causing psychosis and OCD, as well as things like loss of balance and emotional ability. So Captive is really all about this illness. So it basically started one day in December 2018, and I woke up and I felt like a different person because I was hallucinating. I had like a severe fear of absolutely everything and I couldn't balance. And it took doctors 6 months to work out that I actually had brain inflammation, and that was sort of the root cause of all my symptoms. Now this book is all about this deeply personal experience of my illness. So it's all about the frustration that I felt at different times, and choosing poetry as the medium for this memoir was a bit of a weird thing, really, because I'm not a poet. Sort of traditionally, I write YA fiction, so like I've got like several YA novels published. So this poetry was sort of like a really new area for me, but I didn't sort of like set out to write it as poetry. So it actually started as therapy writings, where I was just like writing writing down how I was feeling at this time, because I lost my ability to communicate verbally due to the brain inflammation, and I really struggled with sort of maintaining my creativity and writing prose in my novels. So poetry sort of became this outlet for both to sort of like understand how I was feeling, process everything that was going on, and it allowed me to maintain sort of my identity as a writer, because that was a really important thing for me, because I just felt like I'd lost so much of myself, and it was just like the one thing that I could still hold on to, even though I was now writing in a different form. So yeah, I suppose nothing sort of really sort of like explicitly prompted me to use poetry as a medium for this memoir. It just happened, and when I was looking at these therapy poems that I'd written, I did decide to put it into a collection later on. That was sort of in the early stages of my recovery and treatment from it. So, and I just thought that keeping the poetry as close as possible to how I had written it during sort of the time of my life it was about was very important. Yeah, so that's how the form of my memoir came about.
Mhm.
So Becky, what prompted you to explain your ancestor Roger Williams' legacy as a pioneer of religious liberty using a history/memoir format?
Well, growing up, I knew that I was related to him. Our family would vacation at Prudence Island, Rhode Island, where a place where he went. But I didn't really think about him, so I began exploring more secular spirituality and learned that he was very well loved by atheists as a pioneer of, church-state separation. And I began to delve into him. Now, you would think I have a degree from Yale Divinity School. You'd think I would know about, you know, Roger Williams, this pioneer, but he was a very obscure figure. Parliament banned his books. He was burned. He died obscure, unknown. So when the founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson, for example, 150 years later, began writing about the wall of the church's separation and state, crafting the First Amendment, his name never came up. His books would not have been in their library. And also, but I began reading him and discovered that, okay, first of all, reading 17th century English is very difficult. It is not the same as even several iterations back. It was a major slog through. And I began to realize that our work was very similar. I had written a book, Red and Blue God, Black and Blue Church, which was a satirical critique of how politics is completely being mucked up when you infuse it with this US politicized form of religion. And as I was reading his work, I'm like, I was reading myself. Like his work was embedded in my DNA. And I was going, how in the goodness world is this happening, that someone who died in the 17th century and is so distantly related to me, but yet says and speaks the same truths that I was saying? It was absolutely fascinating. I just had to go down this rabbit hole and start delving and seeing what's going on here.
That's
So
so
that's
interesting. So, yeah. Like, how would you say that this format allowed you to tell your story differently than if you'd gone for a more traditional, like linear narrative route?
well, there's a very personal connection that you have. I mean, when I go through, it's more true. It's almost related to Four Pilgrims, who Roger Williams happened to connect with. And when you go through Massachusetts, you go to Plymouth, you go to areas, you see the gift shops, you see like your little ancestors are now all of a sudden the form of, John Alden, Priscilla Mullen, salt and pepper shakers. And you see a few little monuments to Roger Williams. There's this personal connection that I had that you start going, I'm related to that. It's not just this abstract historical, bloody bloody kind of boring thing that they make you go through in school, but actually these are people I'm related to. There's a very strong personal connection that you begin to feel. And you're like, well, what was it like to actually be my ancestors? So what was it actually like, to be the wife of Roger Williams, my 11th great grandmother, who was abandoned most of the time because this guy was off trying to get the first charter for Rhode Island for religious liberty. And he was not home a whole lot. I gather the sense he was a pretty lousy husband. So when you begin to look at someone's life like that, you say, what is it like for them to be as a person, someone who's related to you, but someone who also had a role in informing history? And by looking at it and connecting his life to my life, it gave me a chance to look at history through a completely different lens I never would have thought about. And, what about you? How did poetry let you, tell your story differently?
Yeah, so poetry definitely allowed me this sense of distance, which I greatly needed at the time when I was writing these therapy poems. And it really helped me feel like I was still a writer, and I was very much still like working on creating imagery, and it gave me this really strong sense of hope, because although I wasn't writing my prose and my novels anymore, I was still writing, and I could still call myself a writer. So I found my poetry memoir has this really specific purpose, in that writing it helped me at the time to process everything that I was going through. And well, I am actually writing a full length narrative memoir, which is more of a traditional memoir about the whole process. And it was because this poetry collection made me realize that I needed to write out the full story,
Mhm,
because the poetry memoir just allowed me to understand myself to like a
mhm.
better level, and it made me feel a lot less alone. But the poetry, it's sort of like very sort of fragmented. It's got like this sense of distance, and it's very focused on me, but it's also like abstract and very experience based. So it doesn't allow for much
I think
explanation
we've
or
lost
context.
Madeline for a little bit. She'll be coming back very short. It looks like her internet just got cut off. But what we're talking about is how our different formats Oh, here you're back again.
I'm
Good.
back. Yeah, at what point did I cut off? So I carried on talking, but I didn't know that people couldn't hear me. So um, yeah, so I was just saying that it was writing the poetry collection that made me really realize that I needed to write the full story, because the poetry memoir allowed me to understand myself to a better level and feel less alone. But as it's very focused on me and it's very abstract and experience based, it doesn't allow for much explanation or contextual information about the illness and the brain information. So yeah, I've got the second memoir that I'm working on, which very much looks at my illness from a wider perspective. And for this second one, I do actually interview family members and friends and construct a storyline from a wider range of source material, particularly as there are a few months that I can't remember at all. And if you read the poetry memoir, you wouldn't get that sense that there's like these huge gaps in my memory, because the poetry collection, it doesn't have a strong sense of time. You can't sort of like tell when each of the poems, which moments they're about, and it's very fluid. So I do feel the
So
poetry helped
what I'm
me
talking
to.
about is how I was able to use how this form gave me some intimacy to tell my story. And
Mhm.
one of the techniques that I used was I used the word Roger instead of Roger Williams or something formal. He was my ancestor. And I thought that saying he's my 11th great grandfather sounded really long winded. And how am I going to call him that? So by calling him Roger, that gave a definite sense of intimacy. I also
Mhm.
include photos of Roger going around Rhode Island. He's preaching to the what he called the Indians in on Prudence Island. There's photos of his grave that I did. There's a giant, over 6 foot tall paper mache in the Roger Williams Memorial Park. So it kind of gave the book a feel a little bit like it's a family scrapbook.
Okay.
And in particular, when I was just mentioning, this is the book cover, and this is the photo I took that I used for the book cover that happens to be his grave. And when I was walking around his grave, it was this very somber feeling, like you would feel if you walked into any family member's grave. And I had a similar feeling when I was in Plymouth and I went to visit the homes and the graves of John Alden, Elizabeth, Priscilla Mullins, and then John Howland and Elizabeth Tilley. There's this connection that I felt to them that felt very strong, intimate, and personal. And for me, that was very important because connecting from my past helped me to reconnect to my family. I had come from a family that unfortunately recently has this almost sounds like a writer stereotype, a fair amount of alcoholics, dysfunctional. And I was the one who was always trying to make the connections, the oldest one, trying to make everything right. And when I moved to the Pacific Northwest, I just decided I'm not going to try to make connections with people, but let things happen organically. And it found out no one in my family wanted to communicate with me. So I really didn't have a family. I finally came to that realization. And then connecting with my ancestors made me realize I have this family. Even though I don't have a family now, I still have a family back then. And it gave me a very strong sense of community, a strong sense of purpose. And it really helped ground me that, I have this family, even though I currently, by outside appearances, don't appear to have a family.
Okay. So would you sort of
So,
like write
so but
a book?
that was a really good discovery, that I ended up making about myself is that, this family that a very strong familial connection was able to establish. So what about you? What were some of the discoveries that you were able to make in your book?
Um, yeah, so well, the actual time when I wrote these poems was when I was experiencing like the psychosis, and my memory of that time is really hazy. So even just the act of reading these poems allows me to sort of like discover how I felt during that time, because it's not something that I can remember now, and it's quite a weird feeling when you're sort of releasing a book about this like huge thing that happened to you, but you have no sort of like first-hand memory. And so these poems, like, it's weird because I find it really enlightening to read it, but it's also really heavy and frightening for me, and, like, it is really dark, so it definitely means that it taught me a lot about how I felt at that time, because it was just so traumatic. And I suppose the other discovery I made in writing a memoir in poetry is that I could actually write poetry, and that it was something that I found that I did actually like, it did have a strong meaning for me. So, like, yeah, just finding out that I could do it and that it would have the same grounding effect for me as writing my novels does, that was quite a big discovery. So what are you working on now? And do you think you'll explore other creative forms within memoir again?
I forgot to mention this. Another interesting discovery that I made about myself was that in the last chapter of the book, Roger Williams and I were spiritual seekers. I discovered that he had left, he founded the Baptist Church in America, and he left the Baptist Church in America to become a spiritual seeker. And I found myself leaving institutional Christianity because it just was not, I wanted to go out and seek and find the truth. And in the final chapter of the book, I described how our journey was very, very similar. And this is also a very similar journey that we're having across the United States. And when I was covering the church in the UK, it's been happening for a long time, of people leaving the institutional church, finding their own faith and finding ways to connect. And you actually see this during the COVID-19 crisis, where people are finding ways to connect, ways to get together. And you're also noticing all the church is concerned about is, I want to open again. I want to go back to normal. But there isn't a normal. We're looking at new ways of being and new ways of doing. And that's exactly what my ancestor was trying to do. And obviously he got squashed because the Puritan, US forces that will be Massachusetts colony said, no, 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 we're all going to conform to this. And he kept saying, no, no, he's a little rebel that kept saying, we're going to do things differently. And I think we may be hitting a time in our history where now we're ready to start looking at things differently. So I'm hoping that by looking at the life and legacy of my ancestor and seeing it really parallels to today, where what he was saying back in the 17th century, I think may be becoming actualized today, where people are looking at ways of being community, of being together, but not necessarily being led by an institution, because I think change is going to happen from the grassroots and not from anything else, And so is there anything else that you would want to say about your book before we start talking about our next projects?
Um, well, I mean, it sort of covered sort of like how it came to be essentially. Like, it is a very different book to anything that I have written before, and I think I'm quite unlikely to write anything similar to it again, just because it's very sort of focused on that one specific period of my life.
Well, the next book that I'm going to be looking into right now is a book called War of the Game. My late improv teacher, Gary Austin, who founded the Groundlings, and I were working in this project about my late grandfather's. He coached football in the Pacific Theater during World War II, which I found to be absolutely fascinating. All he would talk about during World War II were his sports stories. His life reads like the Forrest Gump of 20th century amateur athletics. I mean, he would meet so many famous people. He would go to Jack Dempsey's training camp, room with Dean Tunney in the war, just a lot of interesting stories. So what I decided to do was we eventually, what it's emerged into is a fictionalized account. It needs to be fiction because enough of it is not actually true, of his last week on Earth. So I initially started having myself as a journalist, having him tell me the story during Christmas, 1994. What I decided to do in light of the COVID-19 crisis was to change it to where he is telling me the story during this last pandemic. I thought it was an interesting way to explore what it's like to be a significantly older, compromised male who's now dying of COVID-19. So this is, can I connect with someone who never really connects with anybody, but through his stories, can I learn more about him? And so what about you? What is your next project? You going to be continuing on with the memoirs?
Yeah, so I've got like this second memoir that I'm currently working on, and that's sort of, it's not my main project at the moment. So the main book that I'm working on is my next novel, which I hope to send to my agent next month. And like, it is a relief that I can write prose again, because that ability did return to me once the brain information lessened. Because for a while, when I was sort of like in recovering and having the treatment, I wondered if sort of like my creative outlet had changed permanently from
Mhm.
prose to poetry. But now I have found that I can write prose again, but my books are now a lot darker and I'm more drawn to thrillers. So I've been writing a thriller at the moment, and that's the one that I'm sending to my agent next month. but it is based very heavily on my own experiences because I've got the main character like having this brain information because I've become really interested in how I've lost parts of my memory due to that. So I've got like my main character who's also lost parts of her memory, so it makes her an unreliable narrator, but she's still trying to like solve this mystery about what happened to her older sister. So I'm just sort of like in a way using fiction to sort of like explore these areas like memory and brain information that obviously have a really big significance to me personally. And it is all about really sort of like discovering more about how I'm processing everything that's going on, like even though it is fiction. So yeah, that's what I'm currently working on.
So I suppose I don't know. I don't have anything else. I think we've kind of had a very interesting conversation so far. I guess we should probably let people know where they can get our books. Mine's available at my author's website, Whiff Stock, and also Barnes and Noble's, Amazon, online retailers. It's in paperback, and I've been told the Kindle version's coming out soon.
Okay, that's great. Do you want to just hold it up to the camera again so viewers can see the cover?
Yeah, thank you.
Well, yeah, okay. My book can be found sort of like any sort of major online retailer. It's in paperback, which is there. Oh, I keep forgetting all the cameras. And oh yeah, there's your book now. Yeah, and mine is also out in ebook too. So yeah, and I know like some libraries are now offering sort of like ebook lending because obviously you can't open libraries at this time with the pandemic. So I know that a lot of libraries are now supporting ebook lending. So yeah, I fully recommend to continue supporting libraries in this time. Yeah, so was there anything else that you wanted to say, Becky, before we wrap up?
And thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much for joining me. And it's really interesting to learn about your book because it's particularly because it's like a genre and type of book that I don't really have that much experience with myself. So it's just really interesting to learn about it. Right, we will be off now. So thank you for watching.